Hello, this is Mike Regan, and I'd like to welcome you to this special edition of an on-the-record interview. And I am delighted that we have our friend, John Janson, who is the director, global director for supply chain for SanMar, sharing some information. And John, I want to welcome you and want to say thank you for your time on taking this call.
Mike, it's good to talk to you.
John, let me set the stage for you. You know, we cover a lot of stuff in our 2-minute warnings about LTL, truckload, and, you know, we handle all modes of TranzAct there. But, you know, one of the things that surprised me was some of the emails that I have gotten of late asking about what's happening in the ocean market. And one of them came from a friend of mine, JB, and he said, Mike, look, you need to help me understand. He's the CEO of a company in Indiana. He's saying, I'm being told that some of the delays that we're experiencing on the ocean market is COVID related. And I was a little bit surprised. I mean, that made sense. But then he said, yeah, we're being told that the delays are being incurred because they have to wipe down containers. And I said, no, that doesn't make any sense. But interestingly enough, he is just one of numerous CEOs that I've talked to that are being told by their supply chain people that they are experiencing some rather significant delays on their ocean traffic. And I was wondering, you know, you and I work together at NASTRAC, and you've done a great job in terms of sharing your basic knowledge. Help me understand what's going on in the ocean market today for Asia. You know, you mentioned Vietnam, China, all over. Help me understand what's going on and why there are delays.
You know, I think there's a couple of things. Early on, the carriers, when the volume, you saw the virus move across the world. And, you know, once it got through China and into the United States and they started seeing demand fall off, carriers started, you know, having blank sailings. And so they started pulling. For
those that don't know, let me stop you. I don't mean to interrupt. Well, we're going to some vernacular. I've had CEOs say, what is a blank sailing?
Okay. So that when a vessel owner is they've taken capacity out of the marketplace. So normally they would run Vietnam to US and back from the US back to Vietnam. They just didn't make the vessel. And with 1 to 2 weeks notice, they called and said, that vessel is not going to run that week. And so they referred to that as a blank sailing. And a lot of that was driven by there were no US exports, same type of a situation. But of late, what we're seeing is capacity is just going through the roof. And whether it's because companies burnt through inventory and are now reordering, but right now the amount of volume coming into the U.S. is greater than the number of vessels that are out there. And we are seeing a couple of things happen. One, the market is being driven cost-wise. If you were to go to the spot market, meaning you do not have a contract, and you're going out and you're buying from a NVOCC, the rates from Asia to the US are the highest I've seen them in years. So normally you could see a rate of around, let's just say $1,800 from Shanghai to Seattle. That rate today is over $3,000. And so the capacity is very tight. We at SanMar, we're providing a 6-week forecast to our carriers. And we have contracts with major carriers. We're giving them a 6-week forecast with 4 weeks of that being locked, meaning we're committed to that space. And even with that said, we're still seeing containers not make it on vessels out of Vietnam and out of some of the other Asia markets. So right now, the Asian carriers are seeing peak season volume, and it's at a higher rate than we ever see at this time of year.
Okay, so for those, let's just take a step back. Peak season, John, would be normally, we'd see that in the latter half of the third quarter. And that when you're saying capacity is through the roof, what you are saying is that capacity has become extremely tight.
Yes. The demand is exceeding capacity right now. And there's a lot of folks that believe that the carriers are still controlling that capacity somewhat. But you look at the peak of this year, blank sailings were like 19% of the normal. This last week, they were down to 5%. So I was on the phone with one of our largest carriers, and they said that that they've put almost every vessel back in the string. And I don't know if a lot of people noticed, but just a couple of weeks ago, CMA, which is one of the largest ocean carriers, they own APL, American's President's Line. They announced like 2 weeks ago that in October, they're pulling APL out of the market. So they're taking APL and they're basically removing them from the Trans-Pacific, and they're rolling them up underneath one company now. Now, we all thought that would happen when they bought APL, but I think the fact that the virus hit, they've got duplicate efforts, they're competing against each other. They took this chance to say, we're going to pull some capacity out of the market, and we're going to put APL on the shelf. And so that hasn't hit yet, but it is going to hit, and it's going to further drive capacity challenges.
Okay, so for those that may not be familiar, your company is the largest. Tell me a little bit about your company.
Well, we're the SanMar is the nation's largest wholesale distributor of apparel. So that means we bring in all the blank canvas, and we sell that to the decorated market, to the screen printers, the embroiderers, and then they represent that to they become companies' uniforms. They become like the T-shirt I'm wearing right now from one of the local Boise microbreweries. But we brought in the blank T-shirt. They put the North Fork on there. And so,
okay.
We, depending on how you rank volume, we're one of probably the 75 largest importers in the United States. And so, we're seeing this hit, and I mean, we're seeing it impact us. We're not short product, but we're seeing delays in getting on vessels and then getting product here.
Okay, so I want to make it real clear for the CEOs that may not have a familiarity with the ocean phraseology. When we have a blank sailing, that is when a vessel owner has said, here's our sailing schedule, and basically we were due to leave Shanghai on Tuesday, July 21st,
Yep.
for example. They cancel it because they say there's not, for whatever reason, most likely being not sufficient volume. Okay.
Yep.
That becomes a hole.
Yep.
Now, we have one of my other customers, I was with Michael, and he was out huge ocean. He was talking about the volatility in rates, and he was talking about he has his freight under contract, which is like what big shippers like you do, okay? And he was sharing an instance where he had a container that had been rolled 8 times. And for people that aren't familiar with what being rolled means, they advise you that your container isn't going to make it on the scheduled vessel.
Yep.
And then they give you another vessel, and then another vessel, and that happened to him 8 times.
Yep.
He was also, could you just briefly touch on this? Because there's a second component to this we need to talk about, and that's the labor issue. You were kind enough to send me a note from JB Hunt advising what's going on at the Port of Long Beach. But before going there, he was saying, he's a great guy, very competent supply chain logistics professional. He was talking about the volatility in pricing.
Yeah.
And he was just saying, going from Long Beach, he was seeing, some containers moving at 1,200, other containers moving at 3,400.
Right. The carriers, now again, we're under contract. And so, but they have passed on up to 4 peak season surcharges in the last several weeks. And so literally a container that normally is running at $1,200 could be well over $3,000. And
what's a peak
especially
season surcharge? I don't
Yep.
mean to interrupt you. Help people understand, what is a peak season surcharge?
They're saying that they have the ability, because of demand, that they can raise the rate to say, here's the market rate right now, and so we're going to increase your cost to get a container on that vessel. Now, most people that have contracts are waived from that, and so they won't end up paying that. But the person that plays out in the NVOCC market, or the person that gambled and said, I'm going to play in the spot market this year, they're going to have a lot of explaining when they get into their CEO talking about they were a spot market player, and this year they're paying a price for it.
Okay, so now one other thing we need to talk about that's causing delays, and that is labor issues, some of which are being attributed to COVID-related conditions. Can you briefly touch on that, because you opened my eyes with that?
Yeah, the JB Hunt article came out, and they were basically stating that due to the virus on the West Coast and the number of employees that were calling out, that they were not able to fill full gangs, which are what they call to unload a vessel. And so that they were seeing delays at the Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles that were causing delays to get to the UP and the BN. And so just because of lack of manpower to be able to get the vessels unloaded, moved over, and onto the rail. So we haven't experienced that up in Seattle or the Northwest Seaport so much, but I've heard down in in California, obviously with the JB Hunt article, it's a real deal.
Yeah, I featured in a 2-minute warning in February. I shared with folks, I'm on the board of a trucking company that has a lot of drayage operations, and we were being given a tour of the Port of Long Beach, and at the entire Port of Long Beach, they had one ship being worked that day. For those that aren't familiar with this, about 42 to 43% of our containers come into the United States through the ports of Long Beach and LA. And I'm not familiar with the number. I can't remember how many millions of containers. Are you also seeing labor issues loading vessels in China? We've been told that there are some issues there as well.
I've heard the same thing, that they've had some labor issues at some of the ports and being able to get the product out. And again, you've had a lot of people that have diversified their volume out of China, and now they're at some smaller ports, and the time that's gotten lengthened out to get product to the United States. And so now if you have a blank sailing or your cargo gets rolled, it's even exponentially affecting your supply chain because of the distance it takes to get here. So ocean freight is definitely, I mean, a year ago, we were all talking about IMO 2020, and that's not even a discussion point anymore. It's all talking about the cost of ocean freight and being able to get capacity. And it's very similar to 2018 trucking. Like, you may have a contract, but if you want your cargo to go on the vessel, you may have to pay more because they're filling them up. So you may have to go outside your contract and pay a peak season surcharge or something like that to get your cargo moved.
Okay, and that peak season surcharge would apply normally under good circumstances. You're saying it be waived.
Yeah.
But as Michael was sharing with me, that container ultimately has to get moved. So let's just listen. This is great information. We are seeing some labor-related issues in China, which are further delaying some of that. One other point that somebody was raising is there's still an issue with container volume, getting containers here in the United States. Any issues there?
One of the challenges is some of the vessel lines have continued to try and say they just don't want to send equipment inland. They want to stop it at the port and they want to see it transloaded, and they would rather not send it all the way into Memphis or send it into points where it's not, where they're ending up having to empty them back. And so those are things that the vessel lines can actually do during tight capacity times, is they can be a little more picky. Again, it's so much looks like the trucking industry of 2018 when it swung so heavily toward the industry side versus the shipper side. And that's the ocean market today.
So let me just see if I can succinctly summarize this. And you and I are great friends. And if I'm off base here, please correct me, as I know you will. But when you're talking about the perfect storm, here are some of the scenarios or conditions which we think have resulted in that perfect storm. First of all, you had massive disruption in shipping volumes and capacity as a result of the COVID pandemic. So like Chinese New Year, et cetera, where you literally shut down the flow of containers into this country. You turned off the spigot, as you would, for 4 to 6 weeks.
Yep.
You then turned the spigot back on, and companies who basically, somebody said we had the Chinese New Year, and because of the Chinese New Year, the Chinese companies had front loaded, and companies that buy from, sourcing product in China had basically front loaded, so they didn't necessarily run out of inventory right away. but ultimately their inventory levels got down real low, and we started to see an aggressive pickup in volume in March. We then had the carriers responding to the drop in volume with that 19% drop in blank sail, 19% blank sailings,
Yep.
which further constrained capacity. And now with the spigot being full on, there's some catch up that has to occur before things balance out. Is
Very
that
true.
fairly accurate?
That's the perfect storm you described. And unfortunately, this is one of those things that people didn't see this one coming. I mean, I think that, TPM, which is the largest ocean freight contracting conference, it got canceled because of the virus this year. And I think that everybody was going into it saying that, hey, the carriers are going to be struggling again this year. Rates are going to be flat. It's going to be tough to get business. And so this kind of caught a lot of folks by surprise. And I think it's, again, we're leaning on our contracts, leaning on our relationships, and, trying to make ourselves attractive, just like we did in the 2018 trucking series, to make sure our containers get moved.
Okay, so there's two questions as we close out. You said, everyone with the 2018 perfect storm, and, with NASDAQ, CSC, and TranzAct, we did a 5-part series on the perfect storm, had thousands listen to it. One of the things that we talked about was being a shipper of choice for your motor carriers. And you have provided some great illustrations about how you could do that. How can a shipper be a shipper of choice to the ocean lines?
I think it's being able to deliver an accurate forecast of what you're going to use out of Asia is number one. Number two, for us, to be a good steward of their equipment. They're not mobile warehouses. You need to unload them, return them, and get them back to them, and pay your bills. I think if you're doing those three things, you become a very attractive type of customer.
So John, as we kind of wrap this up, just so people have some kind of perspective, I know SanMar is privately held, and, with respect to how big an ocean carrier, can you give me some idea, are you a big importer, medium? Can you give me some type of scale?
The ocean market is really crazy. You have a handful of people, the Walmarts, the Costcos, the Nikes, that are mega shippers. And then it really drops off to a second and third set. And, SanMar, certainly we fit into, if the JOC reports it, so it's public knowledge. Last year, we were the 75th largest importer in the United States. Okay. We're definitely a player in the market, but we pale when it comes to Costco, Home Depot, and those guys.
But you're much larger than many of the companies, the executives from companies that'll be listening to this. So that leads me to my final question. Okay. Given the challenges that you guys have had as the 75th largest importer, give me some words of encouragement for somebody that only has, that is a fraction of that volume. Are there strategies that they can be using to address this issue to avoid disruptions in their supply chain?
I think, the ability to plan and communicate certainly are one and two, and being able to make sure that you are leaning hard into your relationships with the U.S. representatives of those ocean carriers. They all probably have a U.S. rep, and being able to make sure that they're in good contact with them and publishing their forecast. And if it comes down to they're importing in 10 containers, and if all 10 can't get on the vessel, which 2 have to? And they may have to be ready to say that they're going to have to pay more. It's just the market today, and probably for another month or so, it looks like it's going to continue to be the market.
So that, I said final question, but you just raised another issue. Does this perfect storm come to a conclusion or get a lot better come October, November?
Boy, I think a lot depends on what happens with the U.S. economy and what happens with the virus around the world, and where are we sitting? Right now, I would say that carriers are kind of predicting that Q4 is going to die off. It usually does, because you've gotten in all your back to school, you've gotten in your Christmas, and all of those are in. So it starts dropping down. if the economy's booming, if the economy's doing well, then this could go into early Q4.
Okay, and you don't have to answer this if I'm, getting into secret territory here, but has this caused SanMar to look at their inventory policies and the quantities being ordered from overseas and perhaps carrying more safety stock than you might otherwise carry in light of the challenges of the ocean issues?
For us, we're a little bit different. Inventory to us is somebody, we go deep into inventory because we want to make sure that when that team calls to order their goods, we've got it. And so inventory for us, and we're not a fashion-centric type of an inventory. So the t-shirt that we sell today will be the same t-shirt we sell tomorrow. And so we don't mind carrying deeper inventories, but I think for a strategy for lots of folks are that they may want to give that a second thought of stocking up on some of their inventory to try to offset some of this.
Well, that really is something that I appreciate your answering that, because, in one of the groups that I'm involved with, the Manufacturing Excellence Network, we put a lot of emphasis on lean operations, and obviously lean operations is all about eliminating waste. And one area companies really focus in on to eliminate waste is the inventory levels that they're carrying. And, one of the challenges that I have highlighted for folks that they may want to come back and look at is, balancing the cost of being out of stock and shutting down your production line versus, the cost of carrying excess inventory as kind of an insurance policy. Is that something that makes sense?
Oh, I think absolutely. And I think you just look, there's so many, there could be so many disruptors out there right now. We don't know where this virus is going. We don't know where U.S.-China relations are going to be. We're headed into an election year. I mean, there are several things there that all lean towards saying we could have other disruptions facing us in the next several months.
Whew. John, I hate to end it on that note, because you know me, I like to end it on a pick-me-upper. So is there any word of encouragement you can provide to that ocean shipper, especially the CEO? He's getting this is the kind of stuff that I hope our supply chain members of the audience will share.
I think you want to sell the fact that I think if you're the guy that has a bid and you change carriers every year, I think being able to go in and look at those long-term relationships, being able to invest in building those relationships, and again, communicate. I mean, being transparent. Us being able to give them a long-term forecast is very helpful, because again, they've got people that are planning those vessels out a month in advance. And if you're the guy that shows up saying you planned on 5 and you're giving them 20, or the other way around is even worse. If they book 20 and you only give them 5, then it's a tough market. So I think that's the simplest, best things you can do.
So you're basically saying the emphasis on transparency and sharing information.
I think it's critical, and I think being able to look out at it, and again, we've doubled down on the people that we've done business with, and so I mean, you look at our carriers, the same 3 have been our same big 3 for the last 3 years. So our consistency has really helped out.
Okay, so you keep throwing great stuff out,
Right.
and I keep saying last question, but here's what's, wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask this. You have, the same 3 carriers for the past 3 years, but maybe there's that carrier that could have saved you, 5, 7, 9, 10%. How do you, the justification? Because I'm sure, your CEO, you report directly to the CEO, and I'm sure he isn't coming to you and saying, oh yeah, well, we're happy to accept these increased costs. But how do you sell that internally and keep those same 3 carriers, even though the allure of lower cost is out there?
Well, I think it's relatively simple from the standpoint that we look at the total cost of ownership with it. And yes, we could maybe switch and drop 5%, but that 5% is eroded immediately if I don't get a container on a vessel, if I have to air freight something, or if I have to start going out in the spot market and paying expedited rates, that 5% gets chewed up instantly. And so you've got to look at it from the long-term game, and it's a marathon. And so if our partners are in it with us, then we'll get there. But that takes communication and going out and doing the work.
Well, John, you guys know that we do a lot of sourcing events for big and small shippers. And what we had called the stability factor, what's the value of the stability factor? Knowing that, when you need to turn on the lights, you're always going to have electricity. And when you need to have freight moved, you're always going to have carriers there that can get the freight moved. And I think that's an extremely important consideration. John, listen, this has been fantastic. I cannot thank you enough. Hopefully, just for the members that are listening to this in the audience here, if you have further questions, give me a call, send me an email. We'll continue, John, to go to you as you're willing to share information. And I want to say thank you very much for your time.
Always good to connect. Take care, Mike.
Okay. Thanks, John.